discussing, we're recording. We're going to be discussing planning for current and future fleet electrification. Obviously, this is an important issue, not only nationally, as discussed by President Biden, but some states are taking the lead on fleet electrification. Maryland is one of them. Early on, we focused on electrification for personal and commercial vehicles. Now we're moving up towards fleet vehicles. I'm happy to report that on the East Coast, the Mid-Atlantic, Maryland is now a leader in terms of number of chargers per capita. So today we have a number of speakers with us, and I'll introduce them each as we get going. I'm also accompanied by two professional staff members at NARUC, Jeff and Jessica, who will assist with the flow and the presentations today. So before I introduce our first speaker, I'd just like to remind all the NARUC members, whether commissioners or staff, we'll spend the first hour with our guest speakers, having question and answer. And then after the first hour, we will have 30 minutes of closed session after our guests depart and open that up to internal Q&A. So before I introduce our speaker from the Department of Energy, I'd just like to ask Jessica or Jeff if they have any opening statements. Seeing none, I have the honor of introducing Kara, and Kara, if I get your last name wrong, it should be as easy as sounding out, Podkaminer with the Department of Energy's EERE, Vehicle Technologies Office. Did I get that right?
Pretty close, Podkaminer. It's a mouthful, so.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon to you.
All right. So if you could advance one slide. Thanks, everybody. Really excited to get to start this second webinar with the NARUC commissioners and staff. And, you know, I think, if you could go another slide as well, sort of as Chairman Stanek was mentioning, you know, a lot of focus has been on light duty vehicles to date, but, you know, we at the Department of Energy really see, keep going on those slides, apologies. Keep going. Keep going. All right, so one more and then we'll be there. But we really see that fleet electrification is going to happen really quickly. We have some analysis from the National Renewable Energy Lab that shows how quickly that transition can happen, that the cost of zero emission medium and heavy duty vehicles is coming down rapidly. And so, you know, when fleets make these economic decisions, we can see that transition happening quickly. And so being ahead of the curve is really important to making sure that we have the infrastructure in place to charge those vehicles. And so it really excited today to have two speakers who are going to talk about the driver experience as well as what the fleets can be doing to help prepare for that. If you go to the next slide, we at the Department of Energy have a few other activities that I just want to give a quick highlight to before I turn it over to Dave and David. But we are working with EPRI to think about how we can scale some of, I think, similar things that David will talk about, what Oncor is doing and how we can improve visibility into EV charging plans so that we can get ahead of the curve, that we can get the infrastructure in place and really enable those electrification plans. In addition, we're also working with the national labs to think about what is the data and analysis and tools that we can help commissions, we can help fleets, et cetera, really plan for this this transition. So, you know, we've developed a number of questions that I have put up on the screen, including things like where is the load, you know, how flexible is that load, what are some of the benefits associated with charging an electric vehicle. And so as we're talking about fleets today, we'd love to hear sort of at the end, you know, what are the questions that we can help you think through and bring data and tools and analysis to the table. So with that, I won't take any more time, but I'll turn it over. I think Dave, I think you're up first, right?
Right. We have Dave Schaller. Dave is the Industry Engagement Director for the North American Council for Freight Efficiency. It's known by the acronym NACFE. His responsibilities include interfacing with fleets and suppliers, writing reports, conducting workshops, giving presentations, and running social media groups. He holds an EE degree from Purdue and an MBA from Ball State. Thank you, Dave.
Thank you. I greatly appreciate this opportunity, especially since I'm not officially part of the utility industry yet. So next slide, please. NACFE is an unbiased fuel agnostic nonprofit. We are working very hard to double freight efficiency, make truck fleets better at efficiency and sustainability. So we guide fleets to understand technology changes, and we put a lot of work into now what future changes look like. So we have two different websites we operate from, nacfe.org and runonless.com, which I'll talk about as we move forward here. And we work in partnership on a lot of our projects with RMI. They're very good at green energy. We're very good at green fleets. Next slide, please. Thank you. There is no membership charge for any of the work you're about to see here today. We are supported by companies inside and outside of the trucking industry, but we have OEMs, major sponsors. In the last few years, because of our work in electrification, we've picked up philanthropic sponsors that are very excited by what we're doing to help the environment. So they want us to get our research out far and wide. So everything I'm showing you today, you can share with anyone you want to. Next slide, please. In 2021, we did our third biannual, every 2 years, demonstration of the best in the truck industry. In the past, in 2017, we did long haul tractors. In 2019, we did short haul regional tractors. But for 2021, we wanted to do battery electric vehicles. So we had the privilege of monitoring 13 different makes and models of battery electric trucks all over the US and Canada, all different types of vehicles. These were being operated in the hands of fleets already. So you don't have to live under a palm tree to have a battery electric truck work for your operations. And these folks are everyday proof of that. Next slide, please. After that work in late 2021, we wrote 5 reports last year to help people understand what we did and what came out of it. First, in January, we put out a review of the whole demonstration, what we did, why we did it, how we did it. And then we put out 4 use case documents so that people could understand different portions of the truck industry. For instance, one of the use cases, the first one is terminal tractors. Most people have never seen a terminal tractor because they operate almost entirely inside of warehouse confines, distribution centers, etc. They are a very ugly truck, looks like a phone booth on a truck chassis that move trailers in and out of dock doors and position them to grab empties, go fill them, position them for a truck fleet to come pick up. They are a phenomenal case for electrification because they don't go very far and they don't go very fast, so they don't have a lot of load. They don't build up the heat that a diesel engine needs for its current emissions control systems. So the emission system gets fouled up and causes a lot of extra maintenance costs. Switching over to a battery electric vehicle is phenomenal. We also did vans and step vans for e-commerce. We did one that's much less certain as to how much and where it will change first, and that's regional haul tractors and then medium duty box trucks. Additionally, in the little box down below, we have a whole series of white papers on electrification of commercial trucks. Next slide, please. As part of this, we got to go out and interview each of the owners of these vehicles, the designers of these vehicles, and more importantly, the drivers of these vehicles. We're at a point in time, we're having a terrible time finding enough drivers for the trucking industry. And what we found out was some of these drivers were scared to death at first of driving their EVs. Others were simply honored as all get out to be driving the newest, fanciest, most expensive vehicle in the fleet. What we found out for certain was that all 13 of them were absolutely thrilled with their new vehicle. The acceleration rate is better with an electric truck. They're quieter, so you can hear what's going on around you, whether you're in the distribution yard or out on the road and concerned about emergency vehicles and other things. There's no diesel and diesel emission fluid to fill, so it's much easier. You bring it home, you plug it in, you walk away. And one of the things that I absolutely loved were drivers telling us no fuel smells on their clothes and shoes. And one of the drivers in here related the story that his wife used to make him get undressed and throw all the clothes in the wash machine and go take a shower before dinner. He'd recently spilled some diesel fuel on his boots, and anytime there's no good way to clean diesel fuel off your boots, so it's $100+ to go out and get a new set of steel-toed work boots. Now that he's driving a battery electric truck, he doesn't even need to change clothes when he comes home. His family accepts him as he is as he walks through the door. It has changed his home life, driving a battery electric truck. Down in the lower left-hand corner, there's a video if you want to see the drivers speak in their own words. Next slide, please. I have had the opportunity to speak at 6 different utility conferences over the past year, and I'm trying very hard to learn about the utility world so I can explain it to truck fleets. Today, I want to turn around and try to explain the truck fleet world. We are both very, very large industries. We both have a ton of complexities. So if either of us thinks we can easily understand the other side of this, we're sadly mistaken. On the fleet side, truck fleets, we have trucks, we have tractors, we have trailers, we have companies that use company drivers, some have independent contractors, some use owner operators, some use all three. Some of them own their vehicles, some of them lease their vehicles. Another new aspect that we've only recently gotten into is some own their facilities and some lease their facilities. That becomes a huge issue as we talk about installing infrastructure. We have absolutely dozens and dozens of different applications. A tractor trailer may look the same going down the highway to all of you. Trust us, for those in the industry, we can look at them and tell you, well, that one's hauling frozen foods. This one's got a really heavy load. They're doing steel coils. This one's hauling feather pillows, and it's a totally different use case. We also have an absolute ton of alternative fuels, and this is only a fragment of what's out there in the industry today. We've got gasoline, diesel, biodiesel, CNG, LNG, liquid propane, DME, electric, hydrogen, renewable diesel, RNG, renewable liquid propane, hybrids, and a whole lot more. The bottom line is, I've heard this statement stated about utilities. If you've seen one utility, you've only seen one. They're snowflakes. Well, the same is true with truck fleets. We have a lot of different truck fleets that do different businesses in different parts of the country. And because of that, they have different operations, different duty cycles, different payback models. It is going to be very difficult for both industries to get a total grip on what's going on in the other half of this dance. Next slide, please. One of the things I like to share, and yes, it's an absolute spaghetti chart, it's a mess. I just want to make this point with you. We study fleet adoptions of technologies. These are 85 different technologies that we've been mapping for over a decade in the trucking industry. And all I want to share with you, we work with these leading fleets to understand what they're buying, why they're buying it. Nothing in the truck industry goes from 0 to 100% in under a decade, even the simplest things. So electrification is clearly going to be a multi-decade transition with a lot of challenges out in front of us. And we just released a new report on these transitions in December of 2022. Adoption takes time and hard things take longer. Next slide, please. One of the things I presented for the first time at Distributech last month in San Diego was looking at typical adoption technologies within the truck world. That typically over-the-road truck fleet has somewhere like a 4-year, 5-year trade cycle to their vehicles. And my assumptions in putting this together is if you've got a 5-year trade cycle, that means every year the fleet typically replaces 20% of the fleets. But fleets don't instantly jump into that kind of turnover. So what I've shown is that years 1 and 2 are typically spent validating a few trucks to make sure, does it work for us through spring, summer, winter, fall, all 4 seasons? Does it work? Are we pretty confident we can do the service on it? As they grow in confidence, maybe year 3, half of their annual order. By year 4, if everything's going well, they might start doing full adoption on all future orders. What the bottom line is that we're going to have a transition for these types of fleets that's somewhere in the neighborhood of 8 years before they're fully transitioned over. think of how many headaches we have to solve as we work with utility companies. How many times do we want to tear up parking lots, infrastructure systems as we move toward 100% electrification? Next slide, please. I want to take it a little different here. Some fleets buy trucks and keep them for their life. Now, depending on who you're working with, I've chosen 12 years as a typical lifetime for a truck. They can vary. Some will be 10, some will be 15. Some, if they treat them or maintain them really well, might get out longer than that. But a 12-year life cycle equates to 8% of their trucks are new every single year. So using a similar transition with years 1, 2, and 3 being small and then partial, we start getting out to year 4 for a full adoption. So we're looking at somewhere out in year 14, year 15, before we get to a complete fleet transition for this type of fleet. So here we've got an even longer time period with an ever increasing electrical load on the grid. So just present these to you to give you kind of 2 endpoints to what the electrification transition might look like in our industry. Next slide, please. The adoption will also have a lot of strange twists and turns to it that I want to share. Timing will vary from fleet to fleet. Not everybody buys into these new technologies at the same time. Some will be very, very resistant. Some will be going like crazy. Location will have a huge impact. We've done a study ourselves. This report link is on the bottom as to where we think there are high priority changes in electrification. And yes, Oncor, that is Texas in bright red there. We think that's a great area. So is California, so is Ontario, New York, Pennsylvania. Fleets will have multiple locations, and many of those will have different timings based on where they are in the US and Canada. Fleet headquarters are not necessarily where we will see fleet electrification happening first. I think the best example of that is our nonprofit is chaired by Rob Reich of Schneider National, based in Green Bay, Wisconsin. You'll notice Wisconsin's it's one of the lightest colors, but that doesn't mean Schneider's not doing electrification. They have a huge drayage project in California where they will soon have 62 Class 8 tractors on one lot that will all be battery electric, and it'll be a 4 megawatt plus facility. So fleet headquarters isn't necessarily where they'll start. Fleets with 100% electrification goals won't necessarily put an EV in every location. The largest order for EV trucks right now is 100,000 Rivians by Amazon. But that doesn't mean every single Amazon location will get an EV. They'll pick strategic spots where they can do the training, service, put parts in place, and operate those facilities and understand them. And as they gain confidence, they'll slowly bring in other locations. It's also not at all unusual for a fleet to have multiple divisions that operate very differently from each other. For instance, FedEx has a pledge to move forward. Some are FedEx-owned trucks, some are independent carrier-owned. So there's a lot of different models of ownership and payback within the truck industry. And we will probably build where there's access to power. If a fleet's finding resistance or lack of support from a utility in some area, that fleet may well move to one of your competitors' areas nearby for their new distribution or warehouse or whatnot. Next slide, please. For 2023, NACFE is very excited. If you loved what we did in 2021 with 13 different battery electric trucks, that was basically, we talk about technology being in crawl, walk, run stages of development, just as we watch our kids or grandkids grow. For 2023, we're moving to walking. We want to see what happens when fleets scale medium and heavy duty trucks. We're going to work across all of North America. We're looking for the best 8 depots. Each one of them needs to have at least 15 EV trucks on site. We want to have a focus on infrastructure and charging systems this time, much more than on the vehicles themselves. For the second time, we're going to do an EV Bootcamp series that I'll talk more about here in a second. We are currently analyzing over 100 possible locations across North America that we feel, from all the press releases and other things, trade shows we attend, are likely fleet depots that by May or June that we will be in a position to go out and film them and get them involved. So right now we're out advocating for what we're up to. We're recruiting depots and fleets, and we're looking for sponsorship to make this all happen. Next slide, please. What we're going to start in the April timeframe and go every 2 weeks is our second series on EV truck boot camps. Look at number 1, best practices for utility fleet relationships. We see some really great things. We see some really awful things. So we know this is a challenge. We're going to talk about grants and incentives, changes in the trucks themselves, faster charging opportunities. What can we do with inductive charging? What can we do with different types of managed charging to extend battery life, to do a lot of different things. Opportunity for EV range. Here's a critical one to us. Electricity resiliency and availability. We now have truck fleets that actually have microgrids on site. Pitt, Ohio, near Cleveland, has wind power, solar power, and battery storage as part of one of their newest fleet locations. So it's already starting to happen. Looking at current and future regulations, looking at managed charging, looking at scaling, and certainly looking at the challenge of depot site planning and construction, because for fleets that have been living on gravel lots and can reconfigure the trucks and trailers on a moment's notice, that will not be the case anymore as we move forward. So my slides will have a registration link. If you click the blue, when they send out the slides, you're set to join in with us, or you can get anyone else to join that you want to. Next slide, please. We have a challenge on our hands right now. I like to say that we are in a situation where fleets and utilities are both starting to be pretty sure that we want to have a long-term relationship. But just as junior high school students at a dance, neither one of us has the confidence to walk to the center and much less start the conversation or actually start the dance in coordination with each other. So NACFE and RMI have worked together. We have online a primer for fleets on utilities and a primer for utilities on fleets. We want to start transferring knowledge, getting the two groups to work together. A lot of utilities probably only recognize like the 3 fleets that are on here: UPS, Amazon, Penske are well-known companies, but they're only a small fraction of the hundreds of thousands of fleets around the US and Canada. So there is an enormous growth and opportunity here. As I said, I've been going to utility shows. I see fleets starting to show up at these. What we're not seeing, and I asked around here today, I'm at the Technology and Maintenance Conference in Orlando, Florida right now. I was with a videographer today. We have well over half a dozen different charging systems on the floor here with fleets looking at what their future looks like. We have yet to run across a single utility that's decided to join us for this conversation. So we are actively inviting utilities to start coming to truck shows. We want to have these conversations in the worst way. It's going to take a lot of collaboration for us to move forward. Next slide, please. Something to kind of plant some food for thought in your minds. On the left-hand side of the bar are the traditional truck players: Freightliner, Peterbilt, Kenworth, Navistar International, Volvo, Kalmar, Mack, companies that you've probably heard of for the most part. And yes, each one of those images is a battery electric truck that they're making. But the vast majority of their trucks right now are internal combustion or ICE engines. The challenge the industry is facing is we have a shortage of vehicles. Just like you've heard about with automotive, there's a shortage of parts to build these internal combustion engine trucks. So if there's a fleet that has an accident right now and needs to replace a vehicle, they can get a battery electric truck far faster than they can get an internal combustion engine. And if that doesn't totally make sense to you, the right-hand side of this, we had no new OEMs for the first 30 years I was in this industry. In the past 5 years, across the top are Arrival, Tesla, Nikola, BrightDrop, Orange EV, Arrival, Lion, Lone Star, Canoe, Centro, Vicinity, Via, Exos, Volta, Solo, and there are others. We have so many new OEMs, it's very rare that anyone could name all the OEMs in the truck industry, because it seems like every other month there's a new player. There's a lot of opportunities with people pushing new battery electric trucks out into markets that make sense. So our industry is changing very, very rapidly. One of the fleets that we work with, Pepsi, owns Frito-Lay as well. Their Frito-Lay Modesto plant has made a pledge to be their first facility that no longer has any gasoline or diesel trucks on the lot. They are entirely renewable natural gas or battery electric. Now, to give you a little perspective here, they have a monstrous Frito-Lay plant there in Modesto that's a 3 megawatt facility. Their parking lot is now a 3.5 megawatt facility above and beyond what the plant is. So these things are happening and they're making a big difference when they do happen. Next slide, please. In conclusion, I just want to make you aware that our industry is pretty excited. The new MCS or charring connectors out. We have a lot of different connectors that the industry has been using in the initial validation trucks. Moving forward, the larger ones that want a megawatt or more at a time, as soon as that connector is available, probably in the 2025 timeframe, we'll be moving to that connector so that we can have large loads. Give some thought to the fact that if you've ever seen somebody that's sealing up a blacktop lot, in 2 or 3 years, we're going to have situations during the summer and fall where someone decides to seal their blacktop lot. They come in on Sunday, put down the yellow stripes. Facility manager comes in Sunday night and pulls the first truck over, plugs in the MCS connector, bang, 1 megawatt on the facility. Pulls the next truck over, bang, 2 megawatts go on, 3, 4, 5. Things are going to start happening to the grid that utilities might not be aware of. We want to make sure as NACFE, we're not only training truck fleets, we want to get involved with utilities, stay connected, charged up, and share our information across all these different social medias. So I want you to feel very comfortable to contact me at any time with any kinds of questions. We're a nonprofit and we're here to serve and help make this transition faster and as seamless as we can make it. And with that, I want to say thank you.
Dave, thank you very much. That was a really informative presentation. Thank you for NACFE for doing all the education. Particularly impressive is that the fleets are educating the utilities and vice versa. And I see the Chatamo plug at the top there, which is in my car. And I know that is going the way of the dodo bird, at least for passenger vehicles in the very near term. So I'm going to miss that personally. So we'll have questions for you and our other guest speakers a little towards the end here, but let me now introduce Dr. David Treichler. David is the Director of Strategy and Technology for Oncor Electric Delivery in Dallas, where he is responsible for a strategic analysis supporting the growth of the enterprise. Prior to this role, he held senior roles in classified intelligence and defense systems, public education, finance, and economic development. As a futurist, he has written an impressive 32 novels that seek to inform the discussion regarding how rapidly transforming technology is changing the nature of human relationships in an increasingly mediated world. So, David, thank you for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you for inviting me, Chairman Stanek and members of the committee. Oncor has been following this particular problem for about 5 years now, and I've been responsible for electric vehicles for about 7, but specifically around the area of fleets. So, slide, please. And what got us looking at this problem was landing at the DFW airport and looking down at all of these buildings. The Dallas-Fort Worth area has added 120 million square feet of logistics centers in the last 10 years. That's just the last 10 years. And when I was coming in and landing at the airports, looking at those buildings, I'm saying to myself, if we wanted to start providing additional charging in there for vehicles, where would we build the substations? How do we serve them? Because if you look at the other picture, you can see what a typical logistics center looks like in terms of the numbers of vehicles that are there, the number of trailers that you find in those locations. If you go on to the next slide. This is our situation in Dallas. North Texas has over 24,000 commercial fleets, over 305,000 vehicles, serving approximately 12.9% of all freight in the United States. When Dave Schaller mentioned that Texas was one of the hot spots for electric vehicles, that's the reason why. So there's the fleet breakout. Almost over 150,000 light duty vehicles, 50,000 mediums, almost 15,000 school and transit buses, and 86,000 heavy duty tractor trailers. And that was as of 2018. So those numbers have gone up since then. Next slide, please. But one of the things that quickly got our attention was, where are these logistics centers located throughout our service territory? So we built a tool called the Green to try to help us figure out where are all of these centers located. And you can see on the left-hand side, why Dallas is one of the hot spots. It's because so many interstate highways come through Dallas, from Mexico all the way up through to Canada. And interstate highways, both 30 and 20 come through the Dallas area. But on the map on the right-hand side, that was actually a map generated by our Green Fleet tool. And you can see that the DFW airport is located in the center there. And then the 4 major logistics centers, clusters that we have in our service territory. So we've been trying to figure out, how are these clustering, where are they located? So we can try to figure out, how do we best serve them? Next slide. And one of the things that really got us focused on this was an inquiry that came in. This is an actual inquiry. Company has a logistics center. They wanted to have 435 Class 8 trucks that they wanted to electrify. Each of those trucks has a 600 kilowatt hour battery. Each truck, 435 of them. The overnight charging alone there was going to be 40 megawatts. The current load at the facility there, which was a little over 100,000 square feet, was 100 kilowatts. So obviously we've got a bunch of these logistics centers on the same transformer at the same substation. But if one of them were to locate an electric fleet at that site, we would be building a separate substation for each of the buildings in these clusters. And this, the 600 kilowatt hour battery is the current Daimler Freightliner trucks, the Volvos, Peterbilts, and some of the others. But the Tesla Semi, which you've got pictured here, it has a 1 megawatt hour battery and uses a 1.5 megawatt charger. I belong to a bunch of the standards committees around charging. And at a committee meeting I was at this last week, they were talking about the charging standard they're putting in place to charge mining trucks and ferry vehicles. The standard runs from 10 to 40 megawatts with a charger. So you start talking about some of the incremental loads that we have to start dealing with. We at this point have a great deal of difficulty trying to figure out how to do incremental load forecasting on our service territories to be able to come to the commission and say, we need to start thinking about how to build out additional transmission, how to bring in additional substations, where we need to start reconductoring wire to be able to accommodate these coming loads. And as Dave Schaller said, they're going to be incremental loads. Every year they're going to start increasing. So this is not like a typical load that a utility deals with. And the fact that someone comes in, gives us a facilities extension agreement sheet and says, okay, I'm going to put a big motor here. I need an additional 1.5, 2 megawatts of power for this application. And we'll be running it during normal business hours. And it's pretty static. But these fleets move around. They're not necessarily going to be charging at the same places. And their charging requirements are going to change over time based on their customers and the kinds of loads that they're carrying. As an example, mentioned Frito-Lay, which happens to be headquartered in our service territory. And talking with our friends at Frito, they pointed out that when they have a beverage truck, they're hauling 80,000 pound beverages. But when they're hauling a truck full of Frito potato chips, it's a couple thousand pounds. The load matters on these things, and what they're carrying matters, and how the vehicle has to charge and how it's going to be able to be serviced is another whole piece. Next slide, please. So the fastest movers for us right now clearly are the national delivery fleets. David Gibbon mentioned Amazon, one everybody knows about. We have 41 Amazon facilities in our service territory in North Texas. 41. They're currently in the process of electrifying 11 of them. And the first 3 that they're putting in had 200 vehicles each, going to 500 vehicles by 2025. Chargers run between 14 or for 7.5 kilowatts. This here says 14 kilowatts. My good friend Phil Jones at the Alliance for Transportation Electrification reminded me that that's probably not a good number anymore. This slide was actually done 2 years ago, because the Ford Lightning pickup truck has a 19.2 kilowatt charger to go into your home. So, we're starting to see the issues around home charging may become much more significant, particularly here in Texas, where we think a disproportionate number of the electric vehicles here will be these Ford Lightnings and other electric trucks, pickup trucks that will have these much larger charging infrastructures because they're going to have much larger batteries. The Ford Lightning will go up to a 200 kilowatt hour battery. Yeah. And if you stop and think about the actual load on most homes in Texas with air conditionings, about 7 kilowatts. That's a whole lot of power sitting in that truck, sitting in your garage. Next slide, please. Another one of the things that's important for utilities to start looking at is that the fleet operations affect how these things are going to charge and how they're going to be used. Here are just 5 of the use cases for electric trucks. You have the transit bus routes, you have the school bus routes, you have regional delivery, local delivery, and then long haul. Each of them charges significantly different. And wanted to just make sure that you saw how, in this case, this was West Monroe study for us a couple of years ago, saw the changes that are going to occur in these electric operations of the different trucking companies that Dave was talking about. And in 2021, the ranges were up to about 200 miles is what they were starting to see at that point. And generally one customer with up to 100 vehicles. As I said, some of our light duty delivery vans from Amazon are already in the 200 range, going up to 500. But by 2031, which was the study horizon that we were looking at here, they were pointing out that the long haul trucks in our service territory will probably, particularly the Teslas, may have a range of up to 1,000 miles. So those trucks will start showing up. And Tesla, while we have not seen the actual numbers on it, has advised us that their cost for their trucks will be significantly lower than the Daimlers and the other large Class 8 trucks. So they may end up getting a disproportionate share of these longer range vehicles just because they have larger batteries and faster charging capacities. Next slide, please. We're almost to the end because I know that we're trying to keep within the hour here. When I was talking with Tanya about what we wanted to talk about today, there were 2 things. She said, tell us a little bit about what Oncor's been doing. Here is kind of a summary of the things that we've been involved in. We developed this Green Fleet tool several years ago. It was for early review of feasible approaches to charging. So we mapped out our entire service territory, every transformer, every substation, and we're able to identify, using data from state demographers, what the incremental load growth should be on each transformer, each substation, out through 2050. Then we decided to apply this to the green fleets and got data layers specifically on fleets and locations and overlaid that into this tool to try to identify clusters and service options. How can we serve particular customers who are coming into our service territory? It was that tool, when we got to that phase, that generated those maps that you saw. Then we also did an EV section on our Oncor website just to start providing information on both personal and fleet outreach for education and outreach opportunities for our customers. We had the W.J. Bradley and Associates did a study for us, forecasting personal vehicle growth out through 2050 or 2030, excuse me. We had a filing with our commission, 49125 in Texas, if any of you are interested in just going back and looking at that, just to identify the shape of the impacts on the Oncor service territory and what we were seeing based on the different analyses that we had done. We did an internal analysis of fees from EV adoption, and we identified that until we got to about a 25% penetration rate on our feeders, our current distribution replacement practices showed that we should be able to stay ahead of most change-out needs unless you had those large clusters or had clusters on a feeder of either Teslas with a fairly large charging capacity and some of their requirements, or now the Ford Lightnings with the 19.2 chargers. We then did a study with West Monroe Partners. You saw a couple slides from them, which was particularly forecasting fleet adoption and impacts. We've done some video clips for fleet dealers and customers to provide why, when, and how to contact your in this case, Oncor, if you're interested in electrifying your fleet. We're in the process of building a propensity modeling tool for fleet adoption, where we can try to identify who we think are going to be the early adopters, so that when we have someone who comes to us and says they're thinking about electrifying at a particular location, we can use this tool to go look at who are the other people who are likely to electrify on that same substation, on that same transformer, and get out and have early conversations with them, so we can do one project to accommodate the requirements of all the people in that substation. And if we have to build another substation, know that up front, so we don't go back and iterative approaches to try to meet our customers' requirements. We're also in the process of putting together a portal for fleet owners, so they can register their interest and start conversations with us about their interest well in advance of when they're going to do that. And the one thing I don't have on here right now is Oncor just recently signed an agreement with Toyota, and we are doing a vehicle to grid integration partnership with them to help Toyota identify how to do the possible interconnects for their electric vehicles into an electric grid like ours. And we'll be doing that work at our microgrid operations that we have just south of Dallas over the next 12 months. Next slide, please. And something that most utility commissions haven't given much thought to, because everybody keeps talking about electric vehicles, but there are other transportation electrification modes that are going to start having some major loads. Air e-mobility, some issues around that, particularly when you start talking about trying to bring relatively high levels of capacity up to tops of buildings where they may be landing those vehicles in center cities. Package delivery, our friends at ERCOT have been doing some initial study on this. They think that there's going to be significant loads coming up from package delivery explosion, which they see coming, because they're going to be doing burst charging to quickly charge these delivery drones, rather than just go to low charge rate overnight. They'll be doing some burst charging to keep them going throughout the day. We've had some conversations with regional passenger jets, particularly at the DFW airport, and our friends at NREL informed us that for every one of the regional jets that are going to be electrified starting around 2030, that they will need to drop about 4.5 megawatts at each pair of gates at the airport to be able to charge these aircraft and be able to meet the regional requirements. And there are already some regional jets that are starting to go into service, scheduled for 2027, 2028. But we see them arriving at DFW and other airports in our service territory, probably 2030 or thereafter. And our conversations with Burlington Northern, which is also located in our service territory, they currently have the train you see there in operation in California, serving the Inland Empire out of the Port of Long Beach. Is a 2.5 megawatt hour battery on it. But they informed us that they have already in design and expect to have, again, by 2030, locomotives that will leave LA, holding a train through our service territory here in Dallas, where they'll need to recharge the train. It will have 5 locomotives, each with a 16 megawatt hour battery. And they will only have 4.5 hours to charge the 5 locomotives before they leave our service territory going up to Chicago. So just to alert you that the electric transportation is more than just trucks, it's more than just cars, it's more than just Amazon and PepsiCo and some others. This is going to be a much larger impact to our utilities than most people are focusing on, particularly if you have any kind of mining operations or any kind of ferries in your service territory where you could have very large point of service charging requirements. And by the way, for what they've already told us for Burlington Northern is they're probably going to need about 20 megawatts to charge the locomotives when they come through.